Welcome everyone to Saving Lives, Understanding Opioids and Overdose Response. My name is Fatima, and I'm here with Bushra, Nadine, Bree, and Medha. And today we are going to tackle a really important and most often misunderstood topic, which is opioid safety and how to respond to an overdose using naloxone. So, the goal today is to equip you with critical knowledge that could quite literally save a life.
Thanks, Fatima. We'll also be diving into what an opioid is, looking at common examples of both opioids and non opioids, and also understanding who is most at risk of an overdose.
And also, we'll bring it closer to home, discussing Texas specific facts and figures regarding opioid overdose deaths, how the opioid crisis impacts us nationally and locally, and along with that, we'll be looking into the current policies designed to combat that.
Additionally, we'll introduce Narcan, the brand name for naloxone, explain the signs and symptoms of an overdose, and clarify some common misconceptions about this life saving medication.
And finally, we'll talk about where you can get Narcan and provide information for treatment and referral services. It's a lot to cover, but it's all vital information.
All right, so let's start with the basics. What exactly is an opioid?
Great question. Opioids are a type of drug primarily used to treat pain. They're often prescribed after surgery for injuries or for health conditions like cancer.
And there's a whole spectrum of them in terms of potency. On the higher end, the relative to morphine, we have higher drugs like carfentanil, sufentanil, and fentanyl. You might know fentanyl by names like Actic. Other high potency examples include buprenorphine, oxymorphone, hydromorphone, and methadone.
Then there are moderate potency opioids like oxycodone, like Percocets, morphine, tapentadol, and meperidine.
And on the lower potency side, we find hydrocodone, codeine, tramadol, loperamide, and even kratom.
All right, so that's a comprehensive list. What about substances that people might mistakenly think are opioids but aren't?
That's an important distinction. The sources clarify that many substances, whether OTC, over the counter, prescription, or illicit, are not opioids, even if they are controlled. Examples are like Xanax, Valium, Halicon, barbiturates, and also pentobarbital.
I think we also need to remember that alcohol, cocaine, MDMA, methamphetamine, and PCP are not opioids. Even sleep agents like azopiclone and zolpidem are not opioids.
The sources specifically mention synthetic cannabinoids like spices or K2, synthetic cannabinoids like bath salts, xylazine, and gabapentin, which is like Neurotin, and that they're not opioids. Also, muscle relaxants, antidepressants, anticonvulsants, and antihistamines are not opioids. This is critical for understanding when naloxone will be effective, which we'll get to later.
So, how are these opioids typically consumed?
Well, they can be taken by mouth as pills, tablets, or even liquid, which is the most common medical form and has a slower onset but a longer duration. They can also be taken by injection, which is like the intravenous, the intramuscular, subcutaneous, and finally by inhalation, where crushed pills or powdered illicit opioids like heroin and fentanyl are snorted and smoked, leading to a rapid onset and a higher risk of addiction and overdose. All right, so now we're going to go into the people at risk and the crisis overview. So, understanding how opioids are consumed leads us to directly into who is at risk for an overdose. So, Bree, can you kind of walk us through some of the risk factors?
Absolutely. Several factors increase the risk of opioid overdose. These include a past prescription of opioids, non medical or recreational opioid use, and even social or community exposure to opioid use.
And people receiving treatments for opioid use disorder are also at risk, as are those with high dose or long acting opioid prescriptions. A significant risk factor is mixing opioid with alcohol or the other drugs.
And it's not just about the drugs themselves. Mental health challenges and a recent release from treatment or incarceration are also identified as risk factors.
These risk factors paint a broad picture. Let's talk about the opioid crisis itself. Fatima, what are some of the national and local figures?
Yeah, of course. So, nationally, the numbers are stark. In 2020, there were 68,000 opioid overdose deaths, a 62.44% rise from 2016. By 2022, drug overdose deaths in the United States reached about 112,000, increasing to 114,000 opioid overdose deaths in 2023. However, there's a hopeful note in 2024 with a projection dropping to 87,000 overdose deaths, a 24% decrease, potentially saving around 70 lives per day.
It's also striking that the US accounts for 4.4% of the world's population and consumes over 80% of the world's opioids. The misuse of prescription painkillers and illicit opioids like heroin and fentanyl has indeed caused widespread addiction and fatalities.
That's right. And bringing it to home, Texas, 1 in 4 Texans have experienced an opioid overdose or know someone who has. And the top 5 counties in Texas with the highest counts of opioid overdose deaths as of 2022 are Harris County, Dallas, Bexar, Tarrant, and Travis counties.
And we have a tragic example from Hayes County. In 2023, a Hayes CISD student died from fentanyl overdose. In 2022 alone, there were 37 fentanyl overdoses in Hayes County, with 14 of those cases involving juveniles aged 13 to 17. This often happens because drugs are unknowingly coated or laced with fentanyl to increase their effect. A local family member, like Kobe Fitzgerald, turned their tragedy into action after he unknowingly took a fake Percocet pill laced with fentanyl.
Those are heartbreaking statistics, but also a call to action. Speaking of action, Fatima, what are some of the current policies addressing this crisis?
Um, there have been significant policy shifts. For example, in 2023, the FDA approved naloxone 4 milligram nasal spray for over the counter use. In 2024, China agreed to criminalize fentanyl precursors after negotiation with the Biden administration.
Legislative shifts through settlements have also had an impact. For instance, Teva Pharmaceuticals cannot engage in opioid sales or use third parties to promote them, and they must monitor for misuse of fentanyl prescriptions. Walgreens and Walmart are now required to maintain strong oversight teams, and they cannot punish employees for not selling opioids and must carefully check prescriptions.
And these policies seem to be making a difference. Overdose death rates are reported to be going down, especially since January 2024, thanks to more naloxone availability, harm reduction programs, and better access to treatment. Fewer people are injecting fentanyl, with smoking becoming more common, and increased naloxone availability, and all these better policies are likely to contribute to reducing these deaths.
However, there's a note of caution. Earlier crackdowns on prescription opioids led to a rise in street fentanyl use, and powerful new drugs like xylazine and nitazines have emerged to meet demand. Research suggests that crackdowns can sometimes backfire by making drugs stronger and more dangerous.
Wow, that is a lot. All right, so let's go into Narcan, that is naloxone, and its function. So, Bree, tell us what exactly is it and how does it work?
Narcan is the brand name for naloxone, as Fatima just noted, a fast-acting opioid antagonist. Essentially, it temporarily blocks opioid receptors in the brain to reverse overdose symptoms. It's safe, non-addictive nasal spray.
And the beauty of it is that it can restore normal breathing within 2 to 3 minutes. However, its effect only lasts for about 30 to 90 minutes. This is important because if opioids are still in the person's system after Narcan wears off, they can overdose again. That's why seeking medical help immediately is so critical.
But before administering Narcan, you need to recognize the signs of an opioid overdose. These include tiny pupils, clammy skin, and trouble breathing. These are all symptoms of an overdose, with tiny pupils being specific to opioid overdoses.
So, if you suspect an overdose, what's the administration process for the nasal spray?
First, you want to check for responsiveness and, of course, call 911 immediately. Then, you tilt the person's head back. Next, you insert the Narcan into one nostril and press the plunger until it clicks. After administering, monitor the person and repeat this dose in about 2 to 3 minutes if necessary.
There are a lot of misconceptions out there about naloxone. Bushra, can you help us clear some of them up?
Definitely. One common myth is that the availability of naloxone encourages drug use. The source state that it's a myth. A growing body of evidence suggests naloxone provision does not encourage increased drug consumption or self harm.
I know. Another myth is that naloxone can be abused. This is also false. It's not a controlled medication and it is not addictive.
And a common fact people should know about naloxone is that it can be self administered. If the person experiencing the overdose is still conscious and breathing, they can administer it themselves.
However, it is a myth that naloxone is a reversal agent for all kinds of drug overdose. Administering naloxone for anything other than an opioid overdose simply would not have an effect.
And finally, it's a myth that 4 milligrams of naloxone is always enough. The recommendation is to always administer 8 milligrams, or 2 nasal spray canisters if needed.
And what else should we keep in mind when responding to an overdose?
And you want to always make sure the individual is breathing. If they're not, you may need to engage in chest compressions. And as Fatima mentioned earlier, always seek emergency medical help.
As for the medication itself, nasal naloxone is stable. You should store it in between 68 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit and protect it from the direct sunlight. Make sure you do not store it in the refrigerator. Also remember, there are several brands of naloxone, and other forms like intramuscular and intravenous injections exist.
Okay, wow, this information is incredibly empowering. For those listening who want to be prepared or need help, where can we get Narcan or seek treatment?
In Brazos County specifically, the Brazos County Health District acknowledges support from UT Austin Operation Naloxone. For general information on where to get naloxone, or Narcan, many pharmacies now carry it in over-the-counter since the FDA approval in 2023.
For immediate and confidential help with substance use, treatment, and information, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services National Helpline number is 1-800-66 and this is a free resource from public health agencies.
And for those specifically in Texas, you can contact the Outreach Screening Assessment and Referral in your region by calling 211 or 877-541-7905 or visiting 211texas.org.
And for urgent services, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available by dialing 988 with option 1 for veterans. There's also the 24/7 crisis text line. Just text Texas TX to 741741. For local mental health authority crisis hotlines related to substance use, you can also dial Texas 211 option 8.
And specifically for Bryan College Station, there's a 24/7 crisis response and a referral line at 979-985-2430. And you can send an email to bcs@unboundnow.org. Yes. Oh my God. This has been an incredibly informative session. Understanding what opioids are, recognizing the risk, knowing the signs of an overdose, and being prepared with naloxone can truly make a difference in our communities.
Absolutely. The more people who are educated about naloxone and Narcan can feel empowered to use it, and more lives can be saved.
And remembering that addiction is a complex issue and there are resources available for treatment and support is equally important.
The policy changes are positive steps, and it's clear that continued effort and awareness are key to combating this crisis.
Thank you, everyone listening. We hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights and the confidence to act if you ever find yourself in a situation where someone is experiencing opioid overdose.
All right. So that is all for today's episode of Saving Lives, Understanding Opioids and Overdose Response. Stay safe, stay informed, and we are the Narcan team. See you next time.